So the next routing possibility is working in parallel. And this is something that we've already looked at before when we were making our music. If you remember, we actually would duplicate a track and then apply delay and just the delay to one version of that so that we could control what was happening in the delay separate to what was happening in the original signal. And that's all working in parallel is. It's having a duplication of a signal, or in some cases an entire group, which we'll get to a little bit later, and then it's processing one of those different from the other. And it doesn't matter the type of processing you do. It could be very subtle or it could be very extreme, and then you make some kind of balance between the two. Now, some people might ask, is it still parallel processing if you take one instance and then you convert the other instance into something that's completely different? Like, well, I'll do an example of that here. If I just am playing this back, let's make it a little bit louder. All right, that's good. I'm going to take the group here. I'm just going to bounce it. And let's see what we get. Okay, let's test this guy out here. As you can see, it actually left it in the group, which is not what we want. And I'm just going to go and deactivate that for now. Okay, so we have this drum beat. Let's say I was to, for example, duplicate this, and now this is what we would call the original, and this is what we would call the parallel. So I haven't planned this in advance, so I'm not sure how this is going to sound. But if I took this one, for example, and we're in stretch mode right now, let's say that I took this, I put it into repitch mode, and I did something like really wonky with it. And let's put on an effect as well. Okay, so let's say I made this duplicate of the sound here from our original, and this is what it sounds like now. If I bring that back in with the original, is this really processing in parallel? And I would say no, it's not, because you have something that's so indistinct. For me, parallel processing is where you can still hear that original signal. So you're really establishing a blend between two of the same, although relatively different to one another. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, which is also why if you're processing the delay, it may not really fit into a parallel processing configuration because they're two distinct moments in time. You have the original followed by whatever the delay time is you set, and then you have the delay. So it's almost like two separate events. So let's go back here and actually think about what it would mean to process in parallel. So I'm just going to duplicate this again. I'm going to call it parallel. And what I'm going to do with this parallel version is I'm going to make like a crushed, kind of louder than life sort of version of it. And then we're going to bring that back in with the original. So I'm going to start by going with the compressor here. Okay, so we have this parallel version of this same drum loop going. I'll just let you listen to them both here. Here's the original, which is maxing out at about 9.4. And then here's the crust version. Which is maxing out more or less around minus 4.5. So what we would do is we would take the original version and then we would bring in this parallel version and find a nice balance and make sure that it works in context with everything else that's happening in our mix. So of course this is theoretical. We only have these two examples, but you would want to back check this against everything else that's going on. And you'd only really consider going in parallel in this example where we have more of a crush happening if your drums are not sticking out as much as you need them to. If for some reason you can't get that to work initially. So therefore, you're going with an option like this. But we're not thinking about the reasoning as to why we're doing something yet. You could put any combination of effects down here for all I care, just to add some intrigue and be processing and working in parallel. So let's find that balance. So let's check out the peak here. We're at minus 6.7. Let's see what happens when we bring in the crush. Okay, we're adding about 3. So here would be an instance, again, I just can't help myself from doing this, where I might group these and then bring this down by approximately 3 or so. And then you'd be able to make a fair comparison as to what's going on. So there you go. That's the idea behind parallel processing. We'll talk about some applications of that as we move on and progress further and further into this section.